Okay. Well, I think it's come down to the fact that probably the best way to save money in an estate planning process is to look at what you already have, look at your insurance policies, look at the will you've already done, or the living trust, or everything that you already have in place. And number one, make sure that it's updated to your present life circumstances. You may have done a will, 2 years ago, and you have since had 14 grandchildren. You want to make sure that everything speaks to your present life. I care about the emotional side of that. If the grandchild that is left out, will take that personally, I promise you. And you don't want to leave bad feelings behind. But the more preparation you can do, the less expensive it's going to be for you with the attorney. The other part is you're going to feel more confident about being a partner in the process if you're totally aware of what it is that makes up your estate. Husbands and wives should be equally aware of what there is and equally prepared to take over for each other, and equally prepared when you go to see the attorney, because you don't know which one of you is going to get very sick or die first. So the gift that you give to each other as a spouse is to make sure you know what I know and that you're prepared to take over. One of the main things I think for estate plans in this digital age, we used to do everything with papers and get copies of papers of powers of attorney and wills, and once you take all this to the attorney and he does an estate plan, you want copies of everything that attorney has. Also, you may be keeping a lot of your financial information on the computer, but you're the only one that's got the password, and you haven't even told your wife. Shame on you. You've got to share the information so that somebody doesn't have to break into your computer upon your illness or death. And I promise you that good intentions are not enough. We have to go to that final step. Ask your spouse, how prepared are you to take over? Joel, if you and I were married, how prepared would you be to take over if I became incapacitated? If I've been the one that's doing all the bookkeeping all these years? We get into roles, we get into habits in our lives. One person does the bookkeeping, the other person, goes to work every day. But we need to begin to share those responsibilities to really make it work well. Because what you don't know will translate into fear when something happens to your spouse. And once you are fearful, that is when mistakes happen, and that's when bad feelings happen. So the other thing, I think, I don't know if this is an estate planning tip to save money, but to me, I think it saves bad feelings. If Eric and I are married, you poor soul, I would want to ask him, are you willing to be are we willing to be co-trustees together? And if Bonnie is going to be our successor trustee, I'm not going to tell my estate planning attorney that she's going to be our successor trustee without asking her. Some of this is a huge, huge responsibility that you're asking people to do on your behalf, even if it's your adult child, even if it's your spouse, even if it's your twin brother. Please ask people before you put them down in your estate plan as your power of attorney, as your agent for health care, especially the person that's going to be making end-of-life decisions for you. Make sure that they'll say yes. And then you write them a letter of appreciation for being willing to take on that responsibility. And when you talk about beneficiaries, be sure you have contingent beneficiaries. And that what you know is what your spouse knows.
Say that again.
Yeah, say that again.
I don't know what I just said.
Oh. About having contingent beneficiaries. So many people will name a primary beneficiary, and that stops. They don't go any further. They don't think through what happens if their primary beneficiary doesn't survive them.
Yeah.
And that happens more often than you think. It's important to have both primary and secondary or contingent beneficiaries on life insurance, annuities, IRAs, other retirement plans. What she said.
On everything. And to have especially a contingent power of attorney, and especially an alternate agent to do your medical decisions at the end of your life. Yes?
Can you ask your lawyer to be the trustee so that you don't bother a family member?
You can, but you have to make sure that the lawyer is willing to do it.
That's what a trust officer is for.
Yeah.
That's what a trust
That's what-
officer is.
I would,
Craig.
yeah, I would point you to Craig because, you know, that's what they do day in and day out. They're set up for it, you know. A lawyer is trying to draft trusts, go to court, deal with, you know, putting out fires for people. I mean, it's, you know, I've acted as a trustee a few times and I've taught myself not to do that anymore.
I haven't learned that lesson.
Oh.
You know.
So I think we're all seeing that. You mind holding that question?
Well, it just went with the last thing Shira said.
Okay. All right.
Yes?
Okay, so
You
contingent.
answered part of it by saying contingent beneficiary. So perhaps a spouse would be one. I mean, the scenario, say a terrible of a car accident, one spouse dies, the other spouse is living. If you're, but needs a trustee, basically, or a conservator.
Successor trustee.
If your contingent beneficiary is out of this area, like particularly out of state, say in state but not in Monterey County, how difficult is that in terms of healthcare decisions? And in making that decision, whether it should be a relative who might not live in the area, or say a good friend who does live in the area, is that a consideration you need to take into?
Eric and I may have different feelings about that, but I
Go
would,
first.
as my primary agent for healthcare, I would choose somebody local, a friend, who could get to the emergency room, talk to the doctor, assess the situation, and then call my child that lives out of town. But that's me.
I would largely agree with that, but I think it's possible to reach people who are out of town if you've got good contact information in the healthcare directive. I have seen so many healthcare directives that name an agent and give no contact information for them whatsoever. I can guarantee you that the doctors in the hospital don't have the time to try and hire a private investigator to find your agent.
And contact information should include email, because some people
Yes.
are on their computers all day and not picking up their phone.
You know, home phone, work phone, cell phone, email, pager, everything, you know,
Right.
even an address.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think we're seeing that estate planning is really an important part of just a financial planning process. There's a lot of connection between the two of them. So as we look at financial plans and estate plans, I think it's important to kind of point out maybe what some of those mistakes are. You know, why don't we focus on the people that have already set the mistakes straight for us. But I think we'd be surprised at what some of those mistakes are. I think we've already kind of talked about a few of them, but I'd like to just have a little bit of dialogue with Craig on some of these and maybe point out some of the more obvious ones.
Certainly from an obvious standpoint, one of the mistakes is not having an estate plan altogether. So we can cross that one off and saying that's first and foremost. When I look at estate planning from a personal standpoint or talking with customers or whomever, I refer to an estate plan as a snapshot in time, recognizing that what you want to do is create a plan that is appropriate for your current circumstances based on your current wishes. Knowing that 5 years, 8 years, 14 years from now, you may see things differently and you would need to update things. So I think that dealing with it as at this point in time, this is what makes sense, but be very cognizant of the fact that you're going to have to come back and revisit it. Personal story. Okay, please hear me when I say that I love my two sons. And I have every confidence that they are going to be very responsible, productive members of society. They've got a couple of things against them. One, they're male. Two, they're ages 22 and 24. When my wife and I created our trust several years ago, they were much younger, and we did a kind of a standard provision that said, in the event of the death of both of us, and then we name a trustee to manage assets for their benefit, and then at certain ages, it's going to be distributed out to them. And those ages happen to be 25, 28, and 30 years old. And now my wife and I kind of contemplate that in the event that something should happen to us, how would we feel about doing a lump sum at age 25 to our sons? And we look at each other and basically say, nuh-uh. It just doesn't make sense. Now, so we are in the process of revisiting that and redesigning it and setting up a little different structure that builds in some incentives to the trust that will serve as encouragement, provides assets for certain things. But it's not going to be a situation, we want to give them a little more time for development in the event that something should happen to us. So I think it's really important to come back and revisit it I would say every 3 to 5 years. Eric might say on an annual basis. But as circumstances change in your personal situation, as well as in the legal community, as laws change, it's important to come back and revisit it. So don't forget to come back and revisit and review. You've already talked in terms of an alternate or a contingent beneficiary. As a trustee, we normally suggest that you would name an alternate trustee as well. In your document, you're naming a trustee to manage assets during your lifetime. Chances are that's going to be you and your spouse. Oftentimes it's a situation where the surviving spouse is going to be a sole trustee. It might be a situation where you name other family members, but frequently there are situations where just based on geographic situations or capabilities, individuals really don't want to take on that responsibility, or one individual may not. So we normally recommend that you have a contingent or an alternate successor trustee. You may want to consider naming a corporate trustee, just to know that if your individuals are not able or are not willing to serve, that you have a corporate trustee that's ready to step in and take on those responsibilities. Without that, then basically it's a situation where from time to time someone would need to go to court, and the court would appoint a successor trustee. So I think it's important to have a successor trustee in your trust document, also to have an alternate executor in your will. Moving on, let's go back to the titling of assets. Again, it's so important to periodically, as you sit down and go through that trust review, to go back and double check that your assets are properly titled. Years ago, I became aware of a situation of a couple that created an estate plan. They created a revocable living trust. They put all their assets in the name of the trust. I should say they thought they put all their assets in the name of the trust. Soon after creating the plan, one spouse died. They started going through the process of estate settlement and splitting the trust and that sort of thing. And they discovered one stock certificate that was still held in the name of the deceased spouse. Just so happened that stock certificate, anyone familiar with the company Qualcomm?
Yes.
It was Qualcomm stock, and it happened to be valued at $4 million.
Oh my God. Oh.
And so it ultimately got to the beneficiary, where it should go, ultimately got into the trust, but as Eric said earlier, what happened is it triggered a probate for that particular asset. So it went through the probate process, ultimately went into the trust, which was all favorable, but the cost of doing that was about $53,000 times 2. And all of that could have been avoided by just making sure that all assets are actually titled in the name of the trust. And the last thing I would hit upon, I think, is procrastination. I mean, everyone that's here tonight is to be commended because you're focusing on wanting to make sure that you have a clear understanding and you want to make sure that your affairs are in order, and that's wonderful. But for those of us who have a tendency to procrastinate, I think the only thing I would say is remember that nothing changes if nothing changes. So use this as kind of the motivation to change things and address the things that are on the table.
Thank you, Craig. That was great.
How about item 5 on the previous page?
Having do-it-yourself wills and trusts, no second opinion?
Can I comment on
Sure,
that?
of course.
A do-it-yourself will, or you've seen these programs at the stationery stores or Costco that you know, $15 you can buy it, go home, do your own will. What's the downside to that? The downside is that it doesn't tell you everything you need to know. It's designed for one size fits all. And you probably have noticed, looking around the room, that we're not all the same size. And it doesn't let you know the things that could come back and haunt you later. The problem with doing it yourself is that you never find out if you made a mistake. It's your family that finds out that you made a mistake. So, you know, yes, you can do it that way. For a few people, it will probably work seamlessly, but the greater possibility is that there's going to be something you didn't know, didn't have anybody explain to you, and it came back and haunted your family.
If I could throw in just one comment with respect to the most unique do-it-yourself will that I ran across was a holographic will written out by hand. And it was an individual in his 80s, and he used a felt-tipped pen, and he wrote it on the side of his refrigerator. And indeed, it was written out, and I just hope to goodness that he never had anyone come and clean, because it would just disappear. But it was I kind of refer to it as the refrigerator will, because it was on the side of the refrigerator.
Good luck getting that submitted to the court.
Actually, what we did when we became aware of that is it got him to a good trust and estate attorney and put together a non-do-it-yourself type of estate plan.
Well, thank you, Eric. Thank you, Craig. So getting back to the question we have in the back, I think it'd be helpful for Sherry. So let's say you get all your documents signed and you've met with your attorney. You've got a binder full of documents. What do you do then?
Celebrate. In your packets, or I think this can be downloaded, there is this estate planning organizer. So once you have done all of your documents with the attorney, you may want to put the information in here. I also teach some classes at the Hospice Giving Foundation, and we have a notebook called Notes to My Family where you can also put some of your information. But it's helpful to have it in one place. My husband keeps telling me he's absolutely organized because some of the papers are under our bed and some are next to our, and some are in the garage. And if he knows where they are, but if something happens to him, I won't. I do think once everything is signed and you've got this package, this new entity called an estate plan in your life, I really do think you celebrate. And I think that is the time that you can write letters to the people that are most significant in your life. I think if you have 3 children and one of them happens to be the one that you've chosen to be your executor and successor trustee, because they just happen to be the very responsible, competent one, that you have the courage to explain to the other children that were not chosen to be your executor or successor trustee, and to be strong enough to say, this is why I chose Inga. She is a financial planner, she's a lawyer, she is all these things. You, Bonnie, happen to have 6 children and 3 jobs, and you, Joel, have no interest in this. So I have chosen Inga. But as Inga's siblings, she may become the target of resentment after I die. And our job is to humanize our estate plans, to make them just as clear and just as loving as they are legal. So you have to explain yourself. I also think that in writing letters to those we love, if you have had a 2nd or 3rd marriage, please, please, please consider writing a loving letter to your stepchildren. Leave nothing negative in the letters that you leave behind. I think it's really, really important. We say many things to our kids as we're getting old. We tell them where everything is, we tell them the name of the attorney, but we don't necessarily put it down in black and white. And anything that they see in black and white is what's going to remain with them after we're gone. We want to write those letters on a good day where we can remember why this child has brought so much joy to us and what we appreciate about them. And if you really want a loving family to be there for you in your illness and your death, and to be there with each other, then you have to include stepchildren with the loving notes that you're going to write. I think that's really important. Also, write your own obituary. What a gift that you give to those that come after you. I've had to write people's obituaries, and I'll tell you, I knew nothing. And it was really difficult for me. And their kids sometimes are in such shock that they can't remember very basic facts about their parents. Do that as a gift. Write your own obituary. Put in the photo you want. I'm going to use Lady Gaga, for God's sake. Robert Redford would be lovely for you. But do it the way you want. Have your own personal hand on this. Burial plans, I think it's always good to do that ahead of time. I've often said to Sam that I want to be cremated and have my ashes scattered at Nordstrom's because it's the only way I can be there. The other thing I want us all to address is this issue of long-term care, because we may have this wonderful estate, and all of a sudden we have to go into a facility, which I talked about. If you stay home and you want round-the-clock care, 7 days a week, it's $20,000 a month. To go into a cost for a nursing home varies from $57,000 a year to $232,000 in some places a year. Let your kids know where it is you'd want to go if you're not able to speak for yourself. I mean, if I have a stroke and I'm unable to speak to Sam and our daughter, they know that, having done this work for many years, they could send me here or here or here. But if they send me here, I'm going to come back and haunt them. And I want my bed next to a window because the light is really important to me. These are things that should be part of our estate plan. We don't have to die to share this information. It's important, really, really important. And I need to indicate how I would pay for my long-term care. So just do the finishing touches. Just be sure everything's in one place.
Thank you, Sherry. Appreciate that. Any last thoughts, Sherry, you want to share with us?
Oh, gosh.
Special last thoughts?
I just think it's as much about love as it is about the law. And I think to just see it as a legal process is denying each of us the opportunity to own our own estate plans, to make them ours. The law doesn't own this estate plan. Your estate plan is not going to belong to your lawyer. It's yours. So put your hands on it, create it, update it every year. Have that life planning day where you can celebrate those you love and celebrate yourself for having the courage to make this happen. It will take time, there's no doubt about it. To do this well, to make sure that you and your spouse are equally competent and compatible and ready to make decisions for each other, it will take you time. But when you complete your estate plan, I believe that you will feel such a sense of freedom and relief that you can't get any other way. And what an extraordinary gift to give to those you love. And I truly believe that if you take the time, you make it clear, you make it legal, you make it loving, you have a celebration every year, that you really will let the love survive. And isn't that really what we all want?
Yeah, thank you.
Well put.
So, just in the interest of time, I do want to keep some extra time for questions and answers. The next slide has essentially a summary of tonight, and just a remander that you all can have access to the publication that's going to be available online. That's your estate planning organizer. But I think we're all seeing that this is really just a lifelong process. So, all the more reason to get started on it now. Over the years, many folks have told us that they plan to get their estate planning done or their financial planning done you know, there's this whole I'll get around to it mentality. So with that in mind, today we have a round to it for you to take on. That's really cheesy. It's on here, folks. So we're going to get into some questions and answers, but I do want to just take a moment and just formally thank the library for having us here. All the good work that you do. You know, Ralph Widmar was here a little earlier from the endowment committee, and you know, they're always looking for money. You know, they're looking for it. So if you have it, you know, if you would consider them as part of your estate plan, I'm sure they would be appreciative of that if you get around to it. I guess the question is, you know, what do you do if there's any suspicion of the trustee or the fiduciary using the funds inappropriately? How do you identify them? How do you argue them? How do you defend the beneficiary or the individual that is protecting?
That's a really challenging topic, and one that I think we as a community need to bond together and try and find a way of dealing with it effectively. But the whole area of elder abuse and elder financial abuse has risen dramatically ever since the internet came along, and we are experiencing all kinds of scam artists and frauds and all kinds of stuff that even people who take over managing somebody else's financial affairs, possibly with the best of intentions, and then they get distracted and suddenly start dipping into the till and that sort of thing. There's a lot that can go wrong. I would recommend several things. Number one, if a person's over 60 and they're having that kind of problem, Legal Services for Seniors is an extraordinary resource. They have a lot of people who've dealt with this all day long. Also, the Monterey County Adult Protective Services will make house calls and visit the person and find out what's really going on and make recommendations. There's not yet a simple, quick solution to bring it into court and have the judge take a look at it, but I have a feeling that probably isn't too far off. I've got some handout material on the table out there for some of this stuff, but the whole topic of identity theft and scams and you know, just the misappropriation of funds and that sort of thing, this is a huge problem for our society, and it's going to take all of us working together to try and solve it.
Carnegie made $480 million in 1901. He built 2,500 libraries because he gave back to the community. $350 million in libraries. That was from 1863 to 1929. One of the Carnegie libraries was built right here. The lady that Etta Eckhart, the one that owns, that was the first librarian for many years. So if you have extra cash laying around, a couple bill, stuff it in the library fund. You know why? Because without this format, that fraud and that stuff, and these kids that are coming up like my grandkids, they don't even know who I am. Because they don't know how to write a letter or make a phone call. It's pretty crazy. And so I had to create a website. I did, so they could Google me. I'm like, wow. Okay. So they need to have some kind of a legacy. So if you haven't gotten there, you will. And like, you know, my kids are grown, but the point is that the library is the last holdout, like the temple. So I just wanted to push the library, because without this, I don't know where we're gonna go. I really don't. Not Pete's. That's all I got.
I just want to draw your attention to something that's on the table out there I brought along. What to do when a loved one dies. This is something I put together a few years ago, and I've used it a lot with people. It's just general information about, you know, so somebody dies in your family. You know, how do you deal with the mortuary? What phone calls do you make? How do you order death certificates? You know, how do you pay for things? There's all kinds of stuff that's just general, helpful guidance. So feel free to pick one up.
Great, very cool. All right, so with that, I think we're think we're out of questions. I do want to just invite Inga back up and thank the library once again for hosting us and for putting this.
Thank you all for coming, and just a reminder that we do have the information to download from our website, and also we'll have this recording and last week's recording as well on the website. And please thank our expert panel.
Yes, thank you.
If you want to stick around for a few more questions afterwards, just individually with them, please do so. And also take advantage of the materials out in the lobby. The library does close at 8 o'clock, and you're welcome to go out this door,
Eric, quick
or
question.
walk through the library, and I'll just make
I
sure.
come to you and
everybody's
ask you to
signed in.
create a trust fund.
Yes.
You're telling me